Very exciting episode today of Hot Sauce, chatting with a great fella that I think I stalked online, as most of my relationships with men begin. And Toby, thanks for joining us on Hot Sauce today, mate.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
My pleasure. One of the reasons I reached out to you, I'm really, the concept of like a recruiter is interesting in that I feel like nobody is a toddler toddling around speaking about their aspirations to work in recruitment, and everybody has really interesting pathways into recruitment. And what jumped out at me about your pathway is you started initially in agency in a traditional, like Hayes, one of the big shops, working in that space. Then eventually you ended up in internal and worked for some great, really progressive technology companies in a TA capacity, Airtasker, Databricks, etc. And now you've come back into agency, but in a funky role, partnerships. Yeah, can you talk to me about this partnerships gig? I have not kind of had exposure to this type of role type within like the agency contingency land in the past.
Well, firstly, that's actually good to hear. We're hoping that it's a pretty unique approach to winning business, a more sustainable approach. So, yeah, I guess in essence, my role is to find new opportunities for Salient to work on, and whether that's through leveraging partnerships, partner relationships, or direct BD in traditional sense. I'm somewhere between a BDM, a 180 recruiter, and a bona fide partnerships manager. So there's a bit of everything in there. But yeah, really it's about funneling opportunities to Salient's front door, and letting the team at Salient take over the real recruiters take over, and make sure our clients can find great people. And
from what I see on LinkedIn, that just equals like rooftop sunset drinks, conferences, lunches. So you've definitely picked the nice 180 half of the recruiting process.
Kudos, definitely. Yeah, there's so many fun ways you can build relationships, and I think that's definitely one of the reasons that people find recruitment and probably stay in recruitment as well. So yeah, I'm really happy to have ring-fenced that part of the role. Yeah, it's definitely not something I would shy away from, that's for sure.
Good for you, mate. And in terms of this journey of agency in-house back into agency in this newly created role, what was this something that you created around you? Were they going to market for it? What gave you that pull back into the space?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of a long story, but basically, with the bloodbath of 2022 and things being pretty difficult in terms of finding work, the leadership team and the consultants at Salient were being pretty creative in terms of trying to win new work. And I've known about Salient for about kind of 4+ years. So Mark, who's now our chief of staff, is a really good mate of mine. We used to be housemates. I remember when he joined Salient, and he said, look, we're thinking about this role. Before you look at another TA role, we think you should have a look at this. And then everyone I spoke to about it was like, oh, I wish I could give this role a shot. So that was pretty encouraging. I'll be honest, I was pretty skeptical about the idea of a partnerships model for a recruitment firm. I thought it would sound great to some of our clients. I think it would kind of gain traction pretty quickly, pretty easily in the startup ecosystem. But I just couldn't really see how you would get a partnership program, referral exchange set up without appearing to be contrived or sort of, a little bit too try hard. But it works, whether it's that VC to founder kind of referral exchange, or whether we're growth partners and we get access to one of our partners' clients or customers, and we can incentivize with a discount, whatever it is. It looks to be a pretty sustainable, almost more predictable in a way, source of revenue opportunities for Salient. So it's still an experiment. You look at the analogy of building the plane on the runway. Some of the passengers have turned up. There's a wing at one point. One of the wheels works, doesn't work. All that sort of stuff. So we're constantly looking at, does this work? Are we sort of overthinking this? And I have overthought a few strategies, if you like. And I think if you strip it back to its simplest parts, it can work. And I'm personally really enjoying it. So I hope it continues to work.
Having worked in internal TA functions and developed proper like appreciation and empathy for that space. Is there any learnings that you've brought back in for yourself now in the role that you're in, or introduced back into the business?
I'd like to think so. Yeah, I think honestly, and this is not a plug, I really like that. I really enjoy the level of rigor and structure that I see in the salient processes that are run with our clients. So it's hard to say, you know, what I've kind of added and what was already there, but I think at least the sense that I feel we're on the same page is a good sign, right? So yeah, absolutely. I think the way I look at my recruitment career is, you know, yes, you can enjoy success in agency, but honestly, personally, the real recruitment, like where it really became a fully rounded recruiter, is the work I did in-house. And the people that I've worked with in-house and the people that I've worked with in agency have been good, bad, everything in between. But yeah, I think there are some real differences. I think it's around the structure in terms of the candidate experience as well. And yeah, I think I've just tried to bring some of those learns in terms of structure, sourcing techniques, employer branding, anything, that you can think of that a TA function would have maybe the time and space to care about, rather than just the North Star of billings to sort of go after. But yeah, I think it really is the more science-based approach behind TA that I think you can really weaponize as an agency recruiter. And certainly I found it really interesting seeing how, one applies to the other. And so, yeah, if I'm honest, I think there's probably more that can be shared from TA into agency than the other way around in terms of pure recruitment.
That is interesting, because I think when we initially caught up, we spoke around like this gatekeeping thing that can occur a little bit in the recruitment landscape, because recruiters are competing to an extent with internal TAs are competing, agencies are competing. There's so much competition for talent, particularly when markets are candidate tight, candidate short. And thus, and this is kind of some of the premise of why we tried to create this conversation, is around sharing of interesting ideas and hacks and celebrating wins, so that then we can try and encourage people to be more open and inclusive with their ideas, so that as an industry, everybody gets uplifted. If I was an agency recruiter trying to sell into TA, are there one or two or three big ticket items that, or considerations that you would flag, without giving away any salient secret sauce, but flag to recruiters in how they sell up into or partner with or consult into internal talent functions? Yeah,
I think there are endless possibilities in terms of selling into TA that are, from what I can see, and this is anecdotal, this is from, as I'm sure you can imagine, as a Brit living in Sydney, in the recruitment space, most of my mates are bloody recruiters, so there's a lot of anecdote here. But yeah, in terms of people that I've come across in the industry, former colleagues and that sort of thing, I think there's so much left on the table in terms of selling into TA. So the biggest, my biggest takeaway from this is it is a massive disservice to your BD plan, your client approach, whatever it is, to view TA as an adversary. And frankly, if that's how you feel, go for your life, crack on, keep going, because the rest of us can stand out and enjoy better relationships as a result of viewing TA as an ally. So if you're not at least as good as the TA team that you work with at one of those elements, whether it's sourcing, candidate experience, selling the story, so we'll call that employer branding. If you're not at least as good as them, and if you're not on their side, you don't see the value in that partnership, you're fucked, basically. So yeah, I look back to when I was in TA. I was very fresh out of agency, so I kind of already saw the value. And yeah, I really personally valued agencies that made me look good and plug gaps that I obviously had and couldn't get to, and anyone that could kind of lean in, help me out, think of things that would help me, like I said, look good or sort of solve a problem. Often before I hadn't thought of it myself, I would actively engage, and I managed them like a relationship. So I would take them to dinner and that sort of thing. So yeah, anyone that was, didn't understand the business or we thought was pretty dangerous from an employer branding perspective, that's an easy no. But yeah, I think there's such a spectrum of engagements that I received in-house, and if they were good to deal with, they understood the business and they worked with me, amazing. Like,
When you say it like that, it makes so much sense. But when I was in agency, and admittedly this was like some of the old heads, like the OGs at some of the big shops that I used to work with, it was like internal TAs are failed agency recruiters, and
yeah,
you should navigate them and go straight to hiring managers. And they'll come in and they'll spoil the process to try and get us far into that process and get candidates in front of hiring managers and get them to fall in love with them. And then they'll fight your cause internally. And as you said, adversarials. Like it was like quick, get the hiring manager on side, and then you and the hiring manager can go to the internal recruiter. It was more recruiter at that point, showing my age. But yeah, that was very much the mindset. Is that still prevalent, like generally speaking? Like, would you say like your perspective is unique somewhat, or?
I can still see that ingrained in some consultants, whether they, you know, I've worked with them or whether, you know, they're my friends or they're in my network, or whatever. I think there's always going to be an element of, you know, it's still a sales process, right? You're still selling. So if you look at any good sales process, you've got to establish champions. You know, you've got to move the conversation away from non-decision makers and that sort of thing. I think that can apply to a recruitment process and should. But I think the idea that TA by default are the adversaries or you know, the blockers to decision making, and you've got to move the conversation away from them. That's the real change. It could just as easily be, you know, a really biased hiring manager or a really busy leader that has veto rights at the end of the process. That's your blocker, and then you would work with TA as your champion to sort of unblock that in that way. So I think that's what's changed for me, is just viewing TA as the default villain in that scenario. Absolutely, if you want to make money as an agency recruiter, find out who's holding up your process and get around them. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, yeah, this is my point. You know, TA, there will be some TA contacts that you'll have. You know, some clients where the main stakeholder is an in-house recruiter, and they are going to make life difficult for you, and they are going to stand in your way. Okay, that's a relationship you can choose to continue or not. But yeah, I think this failed recruiter thing as well, I think was a sort of negatively geared retention tool by visible agencies.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think in-house recruiters before were maybe, it was part of HR, and I think that's not always the case now. And my opinion is it shouldn't be a servant to HR. It probably should fit in the people team. But yeah, I think before maybe internal contacts in the HR team would have been, you know, about compliance and managing a process and sort of driving down agency spend. So they probably looked a bit more like a villain than they do now. But yeah, if you know, we are in a now, and I think ultimately we're an extension of that team, and you've got to show that. You've got, like I said, you've got to get them on side, and you've got to be as good at them, or, you know, as good as them or better than in at least one of those areas.
And that was sourcing, employer branding in terms of like selling the vision of the company. Yeah,
you've got to identify where those opportunities for you to add value are, and pivot. And if you can't pivot, then that's fine. You know, you just got to do your best shot, and then you build that muscle, you learn that, and then you just become a better recruiter.
You can tell you've been working in-house in tech companies, mate. All your language pivot, you've been indoctrinated.
I've got to start banning myself from saying some of these phrases.
Mate, I honestly, this feels like, yeah, you're applying a lot of the thinking and language and strategy of B2B SaaS sales motion and applying it to recruitment. Like challenger sale tactics, like it's really almost transcending the recruiter idea, and particularly like given your role and that it is 180 focus and it is around generating customers and clients and expanding within current customers. Yeah, that language is really unique. Even the way you're approaching the problem and the sell and the positioning, the messaging is unique.
I appreciate that. Yeah, well, I'll forward this link to my boss afterwards. And,
yeah. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time. Yeah, and the unique insights. And you are posting pretty consistently on LinkedIn, so definitely worth a follow and getting his DMs. He's a good fella. Thanks, Toby.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Legend.
Pleasure.